Frank, thank you so much for joining us here at RiskMinds International.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You've obviously been immersed in the anti-fraud and crime prevention world now for nearly half a century. During that time, there's been huge advancements in terms of technology and things, but what would you say remains the same at the heart of that sort of crime?
Well, technology certainly has made it 4,000 times easier to do what I did today than when I did it 40 years ago or 50 years ago. However, the criminal mind has not changed. That's the one thing stays consistent. I've written several books, but I just wrote my first consumer book that I was actually commissioned to write, and that was about scams. And in that book, I looked at every single scam that's perpetrated, from the most amateur to the most sophisticated. And when I completed all the research for the book, I realized these are the same scams that went on 50, 60, 70 years ago. It's just technology's made it a lot easier to do, and unfortunately for the criminals, made it a lot safer for them to commit those crimes as well.
So what would you say the key lessons to be learnt are for an industry like this that are looking to mitigate risk?
Well, I've had the benefit of being at the FBI for 43 years. I've also, part of my duties is teaching at the FBI Academy, and I've taught 2 generations of FBI agents. So obviously crime has changed a lot. 40 years ago was all about counterfeiting, embezzlement, financial crimes. The last 20 years I've spent is all on cyber-related crimes. And I've worked every breach in the United States, back to 15 years ago, TJ Maxx, a department store, up until recently, Capital One Bank, Facebook, and Marriott Hotels breach. The one thing that comes the same in every single breach, every breach happens because somebody in that company did something they weren't supposed to do, or somebody in that company failed to do something they were supposed to do. Hackers don't cause breaches, people do. So in the case of Equifax, they failed to update their system, they failed to install their security patches Microsoft sent them, they were very lax, so the hacker got in, sat there for several months to decide what to steal, then stole 148 million identities, 12 million driver's licenses. This is typical in every breach, and consequently, this is a problem. People always think the battle is the criminal. The battle is for people in this business, or CISOs, to get companies to actually understand the threat. They don't want to spend the money. The board doesn't want to spend the money. They don't think it's a real threat. They think it can't happen to me. So this just makes it much easier for criminals to get into all these systems and breach all this data that is out there today, because we're not doing a really good job of protecting it.
So would you say that the industries just haven't been quick enough to adopt, the structures that are so key to preventing this? They've been slow off the mark, if you like.
Yeah, I think that the people who are in the business, the risk management, the CISOs, the people who have to do it for a living, they understand that. But unfortunately, the people they have to try to get money from to make the system better, the system work, buy the proper technology to safe keep that data, they don't get that cooperation from that side. So obviously it's a very difficult job. In the United States, the average CISO lasts about 14 months and is gone, or they're as good as till their next breach occurs. So it's not so much that we're not really fighting the real fight, and that is to get these systems into these places to protect the data. We're not doing a very good job of that.
So that's data and that's big companies. What would you say to the general public about fraud prevention now? And obviously there's areas like social media that are kind of rich pickings, aren't there?
We live in a way too much information world, and I should say that I'm not on any social media whatsoever, not LinkedIn, nothing of that nature. I always remind people that if you tell me on Facebook where you were born and your date of birth, that's 98% of me stealing your identity. That's what we call the basement information I need to get your identity. So if you're foolish enough to tell me that, then you're just basically might as well say, come steal my identity. But we go way beyond that. People tell us everything about us, where they're going, where they're vacationing, what they do for a living, who they're married to. It is just absolutely unbelievable to me, the information that people give away and then wonder why someone has come and stolen their identity or taken over their name.
So what would your advice be, and what do you tell your children and potential grandchildren about what they should do to protect themselves?
I tell them to do just what I do myself. And first of all, I do shred everything. I use a proper shredder, which we call a security micro-cut shredder, which turns paper into like rice. a piece of rice, so you can't put it back together again. We can put straight shredders back together. We can put crisscross shredders back together. We can't put those types of shredders back together. Again, over in Europe, they don't write a lot of checks anymore, but they still do in America. I explain to them, every time you write a check and hand it to someone, they take the check. And on the checks, your name and address and phone number, your bank's name and address, your account number at your bank, your routing number into your account, that's your wiring instructions, your signature on your signature card at the bank, and then the clerk has written on the check your driver's license number and your date of birth. In America, you don't get the check back. We live in truncation, so you get only an image of the check. We do, up until a year ago in the United States, only 8 states allowed you to freeze your credit. Otherwise, all the other states, there was a fee you had to pay the credit bureau. So it was $10 to freeze it, $15 to unfreeze it, $10 to freeze it back again. Very costly because it's multiplied by 3 credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. And for seniors, it was very complicated. So basically, Congress passed a federal law last September now that allows everyone in America from the age of 16 up to freeze their credit, and it's free. You can freeze it and unfreeze it a million times. So when your credit's frozen, nobody can see it without your permission. So if you have to go buy a car, you unfreeze it to the dealer so they can run the credit to sell you the car. But other than that, nobody can see it. So I highly recommend that. In America, we recommend that people freeze their credit. And finally, I don't use a debit card. I've never owned a debit card, never allowed my 3 sons to possess a debit card. A long time ago, when writing one of my books, as I got to the last chapter, I asked myself, really, what is the safest form of payment that exists? And that is a credit card. Credit card, not credit debit, credit card. Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover Card. Every day of my life, I literally spend the credit card company's money. I don't spend my money. They don't even know where my money is because it's never exposed to anyone. So I go to the dry cleaner, I give them my credit card. I go to the grocery store, I give them my credit card. I get on the plane to come over here, I give them my credit card. Now I would do everything in my best to protect my number, but if someone gets it and charges $1 million on my credit card tomorrow, under federal law, I have zero liability, no liability. I love to shop online, but if I buy an expensive camera and it comes broken, and the manufacturer refuses to take it back, credit card company covers it. If I buy it from a fictitious site, credit card company covers it. When I use my credit card and I pay the bill or the minimum due every month, my credit score goes up, so I raise my credit score. When you use a debit card, every time you use it, you're exposing the money in your account and they're stealing your money. So when we've had these breaches in retail environments, it typically is about 3 months before the customer ever gets their money back. That's all the money out of their savings or all out of the money out of their account, which they don't have access to for 3 or 4 months while they investigate. In the credit card, I haven't paid them yet. So I literally say, I didn't make these charges, they're fraudulent, and I don't pay it up front. So I don't have that loss. And of course, when I use my credit card, I bill my credit. When I use a debit card, I do nothing for it. So yes, there are a lot of people in America, especially young people, who need to use a debit card because they're not good at handling money. But by the same token, a lot of young people use a debit card out of convenience. They go to college for 4 years. That's all they have is a debit card. They graduate, they get a great job. But when they go to rent an apartment, they say, son, you have no credit. You don't even have a credit file with the credit bureau. So your parents will have to co-sign the lease. So I started my boys out when they were 18 with a credit card that I guaranteed, so that every month that they were away at college and I paid the bill, it went on their credit.
So it's a lot about education of people. And in those terms, I mean, whose responsibility do you believe anti-fraud measures are? Is it the responsibility of the big institutions, or is it the responsibility of the potential victims? Whose responsibility is it?
It's a little bit of both. We have to be a little smarter today, a little wiser consumer than we did 20 years ago. We have to make sure we're learning, and education is truly the most powerful tool to fighting crime. I learned that in my many, many years of experience doing this. But also, I believe there should be liability. If I've entrusted my information to a bank or a credit bureau or a retailer, I'm entrusting them to keep my information safe. If they're negligent in doing so, then I should have the right to recover losses from that company. And because those things are not in effect really, or the fines are so small that a company doesn't really care about the fine, they're not going to do a lot about protecting that data. But if the fines were a big percentage of their company's value, I think you'd see a lot less of the negligence on behalf of companies, because that's what I find most of the time is they're not doing the things they're supposed to do. It's the same way with technology. We develop a lot of great technology, but we never ask the final question, and the final question is, how would someone misuse this? And let's close that door. We're so interested on return on investment, marketing it out to the product. So if you look in a typical household, your Samsung TV, your Samsung remote control, those are access for hackers. Your cameras around your house are access for hackers. The device that you talk to and ask it what time of day it is, what's the weather, order me this from Amazon, can easily be switched to I can listen to everything you say in your house. All because the manufacturer didn't take that into consideration and close that door before ever putting that product on the marketplace. So a lot of that could be prevented, but it needs to be people paying a little more attention to what they're doing.
So you have to become quite a cynic or a quite suspicious-minded person, is what you're saying.
You have to look at things and say to yourself, you know, how would this be used against me, or how would I be making a mistake to give this information? How could someone misuse that? The truth is, the majority of people are honest, thank God. And because they're honest, they don't have a deceptive mind. So they're not sitting there thinking, well, I wonder what someone would do with that information, or why are they asking me these questions on the phone, and what would they do with it?
And looking back, you're in an extraordinary position in a way because of that period of life that you led in your sort of formative years, where you were on the other side of the course.
Yes, and people were even so much more trusting back there that they didn't question anything. But I think there's nothing wrong with being skeptical. Skepticism is a virtue. So a smart person always looks at something and asks the question, am I doing the right thing? Is this a mistake? I deal with a lot of crimes against seniors and elderly folks, billions and billions of dollars in losses every year in the United States. I just dealt with a woman in Iowa that she's 92, lost $400,000 of her life savings to a sweepstakes scam in Jamaica. So I asked her, did you enter the sweepstakes? No. Well, then how could you have won the sweepstakes? But she was paying them money because they told her she won, and to get the money she had to pay money up front. But again, if you educate people and you say, here's the scam, this is how it works, which I did in this book, basically you read the book, then you understand how those scams work. So when you get that call or you get that email, you know up front that that's probably a scam.
So finally, what message do you hope that the audience here at RiskMinds International will take away from what you've had to say today? What's the key message?
I hope that the key message really is not so much to the people that are here, because they're the CISOs, they're the security people, they're the risk management people. The message is to the people they work for, that basically you have to give them money to secure the information and the data. You have to work with them to secure that data, instead of taking the attitude that you don't want to spend the money or it can never happen to me. And I'll be honest with you, I would never write cyber insurance if I was an insurance company unless I sat down in that policy and said, you have to do every one of these things and have them in place. But if I come back to find out there's a breach and you didn't do one of these things, then that policy is invalid. And if you're going to write cyber insurance, I think that's very important for an insurance company. But again, the battle I've always found is not so much with the people that are here. They're doing the job, they're educating themselves, they're fighting a very difficult fight. They're dealing with criminals all over the world, not just domestically, but they're also fighting with their own company to say, I can't do this unless you give me the assets to do it with, and give me the things to do it with. And that's even a bigger fight than fighting the criminals.
Frank, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Thank you.